now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Monash.
Mr Speaker, it's not often I can say this, but 2 years before I was born, the Chifley government introduced the PBS scheme. And what a benefit that has been to Australians all of these 73 years. 73 years of benefit to families, to people, as the former speaker just mentioned, to especially those with diabetes, diabetes 1, diabetes 2, and every other condition that may have come upon the Australian people. Our health and well-being, the food that we eat, the exercise we have, things we can do for ourselves have changed dramatically since 1948. In 1948, most of the food that you ate would have come from within 2 kilometres of your own home, or if you're in a city, 5 kilometres of your own home. It was all produced in Australia and it was produced locally. So your food was of the highest standard, which enabled the very healthy growth of our broader community throughout that time. Since then, though, our food, it doesn't come necessarily locally. It can come from interstate, it can come from around the world, and it's not necessarily seasonal, as all our food was. Why am I talking about food and regarding the PBS? Because as our nutrition is less, as we eat more fats and sugars, we have a greater need for the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme to keep the health and well-being of our community in the state that it's in. Of course I'm supportive of this legislation, and every government since 1948 has been supportive of the health and well-being of the Australian people, however it's implemented. I'm not going to criticise any form of government for what they did and didn't do in regard to health, because health expenditure has increased exponentially every year since 1948. And there have been massive changes made to the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme over the years. We have now remarkable new drugs that can change the lives of people in a week or so. And of course this PBS scheme that is unique throughout the world. It is unique throughout the world that the Australian people, this nation, has the opportunity to access drugs for their health and well-being at a price that is affordable to every family. I know there are families out there today that have to choose between food or whether they buy their drugs, and we need to look more closely at how we can support those families. But importantly, the PBS scheme has been crucial to the health and well-being of Australians for 73 years. This general co-payment amends the National Health Act to reduce the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme general co-payment by $12.50 from the current amount of $42.50 to the new amount of $30, taking effect on the 1st of January. In a time when inflation is rampant and greater in the foods and commodities that families actually have to buy. So we may have an inflation rate of around 6 or 7%, but the actual food that you need to buy that is important for a family, the increases are from 12%, in some cases 23%. And there are not the specials available in the supermarkets that were available. The costs have increased for families. So at a time when families are under enormous pressure for their day-to-day living costs, this is a change that I support wholeheartedly. And I mean wholeheartedly, that the government has moved one step further than the coalition prepared to move by $2.50 or whatever it was. It's irrelevant to me. This gives an opportunity for the Commonwealth to supplies of pharmaceutical benefits that have a Commonwealth price between $30 and $42.50 indexed annually. The bill also gives pharmacists an option to discount the price in general patients by more than $1 while supplying as a PBS prescription. It's really important that this bill will ensure no patient is worse off after reduction of the general patient charge, and it is established practice for pharmacists to be able to discount medicines that have a Commonwealth price or at or below the general patient charge. So when it comes to individuals, every individual has an entirely different need under the PBS scheme. New drugs come onto the PBS after a lot of consideration by the committee that recommends to government. New drugs, especially in the areas of cancer, that can make such a difference. There's also a safety net involved in here for families that have an ongoing need for medicines. So the reduction in the general patient charge will likely have an impact on the number of scripts a general patient needs to have filled before they reach the safety net threshold. However, a patient would have saved $285.80 in out-of-pocket costs from the reduction. So even though it takes you longer, because the price is cheaper, to get to your threshold, where you'll no longer have to pay after that, you'll save $285.30 in that process of getting there. So there is some benefit back to the patient. The bill gives effect to an election commitment made by Labor in response to the Coalition's leadership on the issue. On the 30th of April 2022, the Coalition announced an election commitment to reduce the PBS general patient charge by $10. Following the announcement on May 1st, 2022, Labor announced that they would reduce the charge by $12.50. Fine. $2.50 difference. I'm happy that they have been able to find the money to be able to reduce it by $12.50, because that's a benefit to a lot of the recipients in my electorate. Why, Mr Deputy Speaker? Because I happen to be in an electorate where I had an older cohort of people than most other electorates in Australia. The electorate of Monash is older. I'd like to think wiser, and that's why I'm still here, but that's probably not the truth. If they knew the real reason, they knew me well, I probably wouldn't be here. But I am here, and I'm here, and I'm honoured to represent them. But they do have an older cohort right across my electorate. It's a regional, rural electorate. At this point, it hasn't got the massive growth that you are seeing in many electorates down the east coast of Australia and in Western Australia, but that is now encroaching in one part of the electorate in the Druin-Warrigal area, where those regional areas are now becoming fairly large, and within a short time will become very large urban areas, which bring the young families in. But at the moment, this change to the PBS scheme will have an inordinate difference to my electorate because of its age cohort and the number of people over 55, over 65, over 75, into their 90s and into their hundreds. And I just want to make a point about that. PBS enables people to live longer because they are able to manage conditions that our previous generations didn't have the opportunity or the drugs to manage those conditions, so they're living longer. So when I first started as a member for Macmillan, my number of people who were over 80 that I write to was about this high, and now it's about that high. The number of letters that I write to people in their 90s used to be about that high. Now it's that high. And my ones that I write to that are 100 used to be very few, but now the pile is about that high. So my community is not only ageing better, it's ageing well, and it's because of the PBS scheme that they're able to get their drugs, they're able to organise what drugs that helps their lifestyle. If you can help somebody's lifestyle, that means they don't go into aged care facilities earlier. That means they're a greater help to their family, the ongoing. They are less of a burden. So what I'm saying here is this. The PBS enables our community to live well and to live longer. And therefore that has benefits that just go throughout the whole of the community because they are actively participating in community. and therefore they are a benefit not only to themselves but to their children and to their children's children. And that's why the PBS has been such an integral part of the health and well-being of communities like mine, and I'm sure like every other member of this House. The PBS scheme is also very, very, very expensive for government, because many of the drugs that people use cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So when a government makes a decision to list it on the PBS, that's your government taking responsibility for your health and well-being at a price way below the delivery price. That's why government often negotiates for long periods of time with drug companies to make sure that they're getting the best deal they possibly can get to bring the costs down as far as they possibly can, but at the same time delivering the drugs for the benefit of our community. And I think you'll find Australia is the great innovators in not only the research into new drugs, but also the introduction as quickly as possible for the benefit of sometimes, Deputy Speaker, only a few people. But we have the luxury in this country of saying 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives are important. You know, I'm saying to the Australian people, you are important. I'm saying to my electorate, you are important, and that's why the government continues to invest in the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme. We invest in it on behalf of families. We invest in it on behalf of very ill young children. And this is a commitment from all members of parliament on both sides to this scheme and this reduction. Therefore, Deputy Speaker, I support this legislation. I support the process that we go through, and I support the ongoing benefits that this legislation will bring to families right across the electorate of Monash.